You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Well, hey there folks, and welcome to another episode of the Just Japan podcast, everything you want to know about Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I am the host of the Just Japan podcast. That's right, a podcast that's all about Japan, all things Japan. We talk about culture, we talk about working here, living here, this and that, a little bit of everything. Okay, so I am a Canadian who actually lives and works currently in Beijing, China, but up until recently, I called Kobe, Japan home for almost 10 years. And just a couple of months ago, actually even less than that, my family and I moved from Kobe to Beijing for work purposes. And here we are. But never fear, the Just Japan podcast continues. After a hiatus, getting settled in, that whole period, we came back last week with the big bang. Episode number 166 of the podcast, we talked to Tom from @being Kansai. That famous Twitter feed, or very well-liked Twitter feed that talks to you all about things Kansai related. Talks about travel, culture, all kinds of cool things. So if you haven't heard episode 166, last week's episode of the Just Japan podcast, go check it out now. Now this week, new episode, new topic, very awesome, very exciting, as usual. So this week, I'm very happy to have first-time guest Craig Atkinson come on the Just Japan podcast to talk about being a writer in Tokyo, life in Tokyo, and creating his own zine in Tokyo. Now, a lot of you people, if you're a bit younger than me, you might not be sure what a zine is. Well, have no fear. You're going to find out in this week's episode of the Just Japan podcast. All right, folks. Well, this week I've been very busy. I've been busy every week with work. It's how shall I say? It's a very involved thing I do. So I'm an international school teacher, as you guys know. In Japan, I worked at an international school for quite a long time, but that was a bilingual school model, which actually meant that each class had two homeroom teachers, myself, the English homeroom teacher, and a Japanese homeroom teacher. And the day was divided between the two of us. Now, because of the fact that the majority, if not all of the students at my school were Japanese, and a lot of the parents couldn't communicate in English, at least very well, the Japanese teachers were often tasked with dealing with a lot of the parent communication. And it being Japan, that often comes a lot more complicated than it would in other cultures. So often the Japanese teachers were very involved in the communication. And to be honest, because of cultural reasons often, a lot of that communication wasn't passed on to the foreign teachers. For many reasons. Sometimes your Japanese colleagues would just say, "You wouldn't understand, you're not Japanese." Although maybe you were a much more experienced teacher than they were and knew a lot more about children than they did. That was kind of infuriating from time to time when you would hear that. Kind of demeaning when you were probably a more experienced and better educator than your counterpart, but because of the fact that you weren't Japanese, they just kind of dismissed you as in you wouldn't understand. It wasn't always like that, don't get me wrong, but occasionally it would happen, and I remember those things. But currently where I'm at now, it's a very different model, and it's not a bilingual school. I am the only teacher my students have, and I'm responsible for 100% of the communication with parents and this and that. So it poses some new, interesting, and exciting challenges, I got to admit. It's very refreshing. I'm very happy to be much more involved with my students than I was in the past. In the past, I was very involved in teaching them and assessing them, giving them homework, talking to them in school, but I wasn't connected with their families or their parents. I wasn't the one who parents would come to for advice and help. Now I am. And I really like that. It feels good. It's a little more tiring and exhausting, but it's well worth it, and it's what I do. I mean, I'm an elementary school teacher. I signed up for this gig a long time ago, and I've been doing it for a long time, and I think I do it pretty well, and I'm happy to do it. But so I've been quite busy this week. But one very cool thing leading up to this week. Well, today is Saturday. I'm talking to you on Saturday, September 30th, the last day of September, and it's the start of a national holiday, a week-long national holiday here in China. So for the next week, I'm here in Beijing with no work. It's awesome. It's amazing. A lot of my colleagues are traveling internationally. Some people are going back to Canada, to America. Some people are going to Korea. A lot of people are going to Japan, doing a lot of different things. My family and I, we're staying here in Beijing because we just got here. We haven't seen anything in the city yet. But I tell you what, I've been very active on Twitter, though, of course, at JLandKev. That's the Twitter feed for the Just Japan podcast, sharing tons of cool stuff about Japan, tons of cool stuff about what I'm doing, and some really cool things about Beijing. So I want you guys, and wow, traffic's really getting loud where I'm at. So I tell you guys, if you're not following me on the social medias, you want to, because there's a lot of cool stuff there. So follow me at JLandKev on Twitter. Go follow the YouTube channel at Busan Kevin. There's like literally thousands of great Japan videos on that YouTube channel from all of my years in Japan. If you scratch down even to the very bottom end of that YouTube channel, you'll even find some videos of me in Canada and in Korea before I was in Japan. And now you'll find videos of me here in Beijing, China. Okay, so check that on out. Of course, and follow, you got to go to justjapanstuff.com that's the hub. That's where all the stuff is. And what else? Go to Facebook, follow me on Facebook at Just Japan Stuff. And of course, just Google it. This podcast is all over the place. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, you name it. So go follow it. Listen. Well, you are now, I guess. But subscribe if you're not already. All right, folks, you can hear lots of colorful sounds of downtown Beijing behind me as I do my walking, talking podcast recording. By the way, still waiting on our big shipment of 25 boxes of awesome to come from Kobe, Japan, here to Beijing. Again, as I'm recording this, it's September the 30th. As you're getting this, probably October 1st or 2nd. Probably 2 weeks after that, our stuff will arrive. It's going to be like an early Christmas. My wife's sewing machines will be there. If you guys don't know, my wife is an avid clothing maker, She makes children's clothing, handmade stuff. Amazing. Before we decided to leave Japan, she was actually getting set to open an online store. She was preparing a lot of stock, making a lot of clothing designs, patterns, making the clothes, and we were going to be opening an online shop. Then this employment opportunity in Beijing came up. We decided to jump for it, go for it. But her sewing machines are coming. A lot of, we made big promises to the kids. I mean, they were so happy, obviously, in Kobe, Japan, that with their lives, with their elementary school, with their kindergarten, that we basically made the deal with them. If we're going to uproot you guys and bring you here to China, we're going to make sure that you're comfortable and you've got tons of your toys, your special things that you guys love. So a lot of those things are coming. And my microphones, my Blue Snowball and Blue Yeti that I don't have now, they're going to be coming. So I can't wait to have some better equipment. I'm recording this on my Edgetige lavalier microphone, which is attached to my iPhone 6S. It's not bad quality for kind of mobile recording. But yeah, so there we go. So a few more podcast weeks without the mics. But hey, it's all about the content, right, guys? It's all about the content. You guys are getting great content, so I know you're happy. And speaking of great content, guys, sit back and prepare to listen to my interview with Craig Atkinson, who is a writer based in Tokyo, Japan. He's from Australia. He's doing some really cool, interesting, creative things. When I think of what he's doing, it really makes me think of the fact that he's a writer and kind of like an artist at the same time. It's really neat what he's doing with the zines. So sit back and find out more.
Please hang up and try again.
All right, folks, it's episode number 167 of the Just Japan podcast. And tonight we're going to be talking about writing in Japan and making zines in Japan. And I'm really happy to have first-time guest on the Just Japan podcast, Craig Atkinson. Craig, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you here this evening to talk about writing, which is a topic I enjoy hearing about, listening about, learning about. Sometimes I dabble in it. But to get things started, can you tell us, the Just Japan podcast listeners, a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you live now, and what you do in Japan?
Okay, so I'm from Australia, from Melbourne, the Melbourne area. Um, I'm married. I got 2 kids. And I'm currently living in Tokyo.
Okay.
I first came to Japan 10 years ago
Okay.
on a working holiday visa, and I met my wife around that time, and my visa was ending just after we'd met, and we decided to move back to Australia, and we stayed there for 5 years.
Okay.
And then we moved back here in 2013.
Okay. Wow. Cool. So you've been in Tokyo the whole time that you've been in Japan?
Yeah, so I think like altogether it's about 6 years or something like that, 5, 6 years. I've been with my wife for 10 years now, so been married for 8.
Nice. Nice. Awesome. So I mean, you came here on a working holiday visa,
Mm-hmm.
as many people do to travel and experience the life in Japan. I'm curious, what made you want to get that working holiday visa? What got you interested in Japan in the first place?
Well, really, it was about enjoying travel.
Hmm.
Before Japan, I lived in London for a year and a half
Okay.
on a working holiday visa. And I wanted to, and I was 25 when I started that. So getting back to Australia about, 26 and a half, and I was like, I want to continue traveling. And then I sort of thought about my options, and I thought, at that time it was quite common and popular for a lot of people to come over to Japan or maybe South Korea
Yeah.
and teach English. And I thought, well, maybe that's a way I can continue to travel and earn a bit of money on the side, and that's really what it was. Mainly, it was
Cool. I mean, it's really interesting for me. I mean, you're from Australia, and as I've learned over my years of being in South Korea, where I've met very few Australians actually back in the early days when I was in South Korea, um, and then when I moved to Japan, I met lots of Australians, and I said, okay, this is where everyone is.
Mm,
But then I came to
mhm.
learn more as I met more Australians that there's definitely a connection between Japan and Australia with regards to studying language, trade, commerce that we didn't have in Canada, maybe perhaps because I know like Japan was never on my radar.
Uh-huh.
As a young person, as a college student, university student, and I just didn't know people who went to Japan to work, or I didn't know people who went to Japan to teach. And then when I hear, I meet so many people from Australia, it seems like it's a pretty, I don't know, common thing maybe, or more common thing.
Yeah, I think that, like you said earlier about the relations, like I don't know a lot about it, but like a lot of the schools will have sister schools
Mm,
with a lot of the Japanese schools. And my high school that I went to actually had that, and some of the students, and I wasn't really that interested back then when I was 17 years old or younger. But I remember, having some exchange students and some other students going there, and we'd have during the school assembly. Sometimes there would be like presentations in Japanese and things like that.
okay,
A
yeah.
little bit by some of the students studying, and so I guess there was always a little bit of, and also, um, no, Melbourne is down south. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Australia, but in the northern part of Australia, there's a lot of the Great Barrier Reef, Cairns, and some great holiday spots
Hmm.
for which a lot of Japanese take advantage of because it's only a short flight, a 7-hour flight, and there's only an hour difference in time, so there's
Yeah,
not really any time lost, in between the short vacations.
yeah.
So I don't know. It's it does have a close relationship in, I guess, many aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of
Business,
Japanese,
tourism.
a lot of tourism. I know, like, I used to be a marathon runner, and I meet a lot of Japanese runners, of course, when I lived in Japan. And I know, like, so many people, so many Japanese runners every year go to the Gold Coast Marathon. That's like a huge destination for a destination marathon for Japanese runners. But okay, so I mean, you're in Tokyo, and I'm really curious. So I never lived in Tokyo. I lived in Kobe my entire time in Japan, and the Kansai region for nearly 10 years. And of course, I'd been to Tokyo on a few occasions, not very many, surprisingly enough. In 10 years living in Japan, I think I'd been to Tokyo 2 times, 3 times
Oh.
that whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you live in Tokyo. Um, what do you think about life in Tokyo? Do you enjoy living there?
Yeah, I do. And a lot of the reason is because my family's here. I'm here with my wife, and I've got 2 kids. Yeah, as I maybe said earlier.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the reason. And also, like the city is. I think the city's great. I think it's got a lot to offer, and
Yeah.
it's just. I think it's like a lot of major cities, but it takes a long time but it takes a bit of digging to find your little path in the city, and like your own haunts and places you like, and even meeting people. I think that the bigger the city, the harder it, or the longer, or the harder you have to look to make the connection.
I suppose with those big cities, living in somewhere like Tokyo, or I'm now in Beijing. It's there's so many people who come and go, and there's so many travelers and tourists and visitors, right?
Yeah.
I
So it does. It does take. I think it takes a little bit of time.
yeah. Okay, so I mean, you're in Tokyo. Are you near the downtown area, or are you kind of on the outskirts?
I'm on the outskirts, but I'm. There's the main line that runs around Tokyo, the Yamanote line, and in the southern area of that, there's Shibuya. Everybody knows Shibuya.
Yep.
And I'm on a train line that's only I live like 4 stations from there, just
Oh wow.
a little
Okay.
bit further south.
Oh okay.
So it's
A hop, skip, and
it's
a
a
jump.
10-minute train ride.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
pretty much. It's a 10-minute train ride, and it's quite convenient. So yeah, where I live, it's pretty easy to get into the metropolis part. Really.
Nice. Okay, so the reason why I wanted you to come on the podcast tonight is I wanted to talk about writing and your writing. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing background, how you got into writing, and what kind of writing you're doing right now in Japan?
Yeah, so I guess I sort of got into it by a little bit of default. Like I guess it sort of started a little bit around I was 20. I played drums in a punk band.
Okay.
And the lead singer, he was, he wrote a lot. He was making these things called zines, which we all know of. And I started to contribute a little bit to that zine by writing the odd sort of very short story. And then I didn't really do much with it after that. But then when I went traveling, when I went over and lived in London, I also had a bit of a passion for photography at that time.
Okay, yeah.
But this was the days of film photography. And when you're a backpacker and you land in London with, enough money to pay your rent for the first month, it's a little hard. I couldn't afford film. So I just thought, well, how else can I document? So I started writing really then. So that was 2005, and I didn't do a lot with it, but like sort of then. But I just wrote. Actually, I used MySpace a lot.
Okay, yeah.
At that time.
Oh, I mean, it was
if anyone
huge. I
remembers
mean,
MySpace.
yeah. I mean, I was a musician as well. And, ironically enough, I was a drummer, and I played in bands at that time. I would have been living in Korea, 2005 or so, and I was playing in bands. And the reason why, actually, I think I used to joke around. The only reason why I had a MySpace site was because my band had one, and it was the only way to access the schedule. Where am I playing tomorrow night? Where am I playing on Sunday? Where am I playing on Friday? Yeah. So,
well, mine ended up being that a lot of my friends back home, it was the only way we could really communicate. Like, not really many of them would sit down and write an email, and it was just a way to communicate. And then also I used it as a way to, I guess, write like short stories or blogs sort of then.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really got into it, and I was into it for maybe a couple of years, and then I remember actually, just as sort of a side note, when I came to Japan, I was still on MySpace, and all my friends had disappeared, and I'm like, why aren't you guys on MySpace anymore? And they're like, oh, we're on this new thing called Facebook.
Oh yeah, yes, of
So I
course.
had to set up a Facebook page then.
Yeah. MySpace
But
just
with
disappeared
so
quickly.
with the writing, so that's when it sort of started. I guess it started back then, and then living in Japan, I continued to write. And then when MySpace went away, I didn't really have a place to post it or anything. But I picked it back up again when I moved back here in just a few years ago, in 2013.
Yeah.
So I had a few years off writing. When I went back home, I guess I was busy trying to start a life with my new girlfriend slash wife.
Yep.
And yeah, coming back here gave me the space and the time to pursue the passion.
Cool. So I mean, like once you got back here and you started writing, what type of writing were you doing? Were you doing were you writing kind of travel stories, travel blogs? Were you writing fictional things? What were you kind of getting into when you first jumped back into it?
A lot of it, I guess, is stream of consciousness.
Okay.
I was hugely, or I am hugely influenced by uh, another guy who actually started with zines many years ago in America, called Aaron Comet Bus. And he sort of formed, and that's sort of what I started with, and then I moved more into the blog style, the blogging style, and writing about fatherhood, and also writing about coffee. It's another one of my little hobby slash passions, and and then I dabbled with some short stories, and I still enjoy doing that. So I guess I sort of go between a few of the sort of, I guess, traditional style blogs, also a little bit of short stories, some short stories, and sort of stream of consciousness. I guess that would be the best way
Cool.
to describe it.
Yeah. No, okay. Now the term has come up a few times. I'm of an age where I know what a zine is, but there are
Hmm.
probably there's a lot of people who listen to the Just Japan podcast who are in high school, they're in university. They've got aspirations of coming to Japan someday to work
Hmm.
or to live, to travel. They might not be familiar with what a zine is. Can you give us a little definition or example, or tell us a little bit about what is a zine?
Well, a zine is, I guess, basically a DIY. 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 Well, originally it comes from the word fanzine, so it's shortened from fanzine.
Hmm.
And that started in, I think, maybe the 30s with science fiction writers. They
Hmm.
started doing little fanzines, and they would make them at home. They would type them up on their typewriter, and it would be stories or things like that. And then they would hand them around to their friends. And
Mm.
then it would be also maybe like subcultured, so it might be, the sci-fi or the horror and things like that. And yeah, they would type them up and hand them out, and then they they sort of died down a little bit. And I think in about the 70s, 80s, in the punk scene,
Yeah.
they started to come back, and that's when they came back, and people would do scene reports, or they would just talk about maybe different bands that were playing, and then it sort of got a bit like into poetry, things like that. And then now zines are, a lot of them are DIY. A lot of them are just printed at Kinko's, or even through Kinko's or something like that. But then also there's a lot of photo zines now. Illustrators are loving zines. So illustrators it's a way to show their work. So it's a handmade book, basically. I say,
Mm.
yeah. Illustrators, writers, photographers, yeah, everyone who's creative. It's giving them a chance to produce their own work and get it out there to share with their friends and share with people who are interested.
Yeah. So okay. I mean, now with regards to, like, you mentioned that you first got into writing when you were younger, and playing in bands. You were writing, or helping write or contribute to zines in those days. How would you distribute those zines in back when you were playing in punk bands? Would you bring them to shows? Would you hand them out at school? What would you do?
Yeah, both of them really. When we did start in the band, we were I was in my final year of high school, and the other guys were in their like year 11. They were in their second last year of high school, and and yeah, so we would hand them out at schools and also at shows. So they were still underage when we started playing our first shows, but um, yeah, we would take them to shows. We'd have a merch table, so we'd have patches we made with some calico and some spray paint, and
Okay.
we had our zines, we had some T-shirts, and badges. Also, we made some badges back then.
Cool. Okay. So, the reason one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on this evening was to talk about a new project that you have as a writer. You've created your own zine recently that you're
Yes, I have. Yes.
distributing in Tokyo. So, and to people who live abroad or who don't live in Tokyo via mail. Could you tell us about this zine that you're producing now?
So I've thought about it for a while, wanting to do one. That being about or something like that, and I remember mentioning it to a friend, and they said, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." And then I didn't do anything with that idea for a little while, and then I I wanted to do, basically my thinking was taking my blog offline. Um, I think there's like I try and support other writers and photographers and artists and such, and I think on social media and that, all you can really do is you can well, some of the things you can do is you can like, you can share.
Yeah.
Some people have a Patreon which you can donate to, and that's all you can really do. Of course, the Patreon is a fantastic way, but not everyone has that. Most people just, they'll take a photo and they'll share it on one of the social medias, uh, and then that's as far as it goes. And I was happy enough with that with my blog, but I also wanted to produce something and give, like, give, if someone wanted to support me, I wanted to give them something back, something physical,
Yeah. Okay.
in the form of basically a zine. And it was, so that was basically the thinking behind it. It was a way I can mix some of my enjoyment of photography,
Hmm.
of like as a hobby photography, and my writing, and produce an artwork, and also, yeah, send it around the world. So like you said, I've sent a few over to the US. I've sent some back to Australia. Over to Singapore and a few places in Asia, and all around, yeah, Japan too. So it's been fantastic. It's been a whole also learning process, in sending things out and how the post office works and how much it costs me for envelopes, and where can I get cheaper envelopes, and how can I distribute it a little bit cheaper, so then it's not it doesn't end up costing me money, when I'm trying to just, produce something. So
Okay.
it's
So when did you first publish or produce your first issue?
it was a couple of months ago, so it was two. So I've got two issues out now.
Okay. And
I'm
what's the,
into
what's
my
the name of
third.
your
My
zine, by the
third.
way?
It's called Coffee and People.
Okay.
Um, because because of my my loves. I do like, everyone likes people. I like people, and also I do love coffee. Roasting coffee is actually one of my little hobbies, and I thought I would, that's what I'd title it.
Okay. So, in Coffee and People, if someone picked up a copy of your zine, Coffee and People, what could they expect to find inside?
They would. So the first issue is a story about when I lived in London. But it starts off, coffee related. And yeah, it's a story that goes back to quite a serious thing that happened when I lived in London. And then
Okay.
the second issue is a little bit just talking about me a little bit, and giving it just a little bit of insight into my life when I was a little bit younger.
Okay. Cool. So I'm curious then. Um, how do you produce, like physically? How do you produce your zine? So how? Well, I mean, let's. Is there a digital layout that it begins with, and then it
Um,
becomes a physical thing? So
Sorry.
what is the process?
Well, well, the process is so the story I write some of it on my phone, some of it on my iPad.
Mm-hmm.
I just use like a Word app, and um, and I've actually adjusted the margin so when I print it, it works out the perfect size for the little zine. So all I have to do is cut the length of the page.
Mm-hmm.
So the zine's quite, it's a smaller style book, so it's not like a typical, A4 size book or anything like that. It's quite smaller. So I've narrowed them. I've brought the margins right in.
Okay.
So I write, on my phone on the way to work, things like that. And then on my iPad, till all hours of the night, and then when that process is done, like when I'm sort of happy, I usually pass it on to someone to edit for me,
Yeah.
get them to look over. I've got a couple of people that I use, and then I select a photo that I want to use that will go well with the story for the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And then I print that off at a local, local photo printing shop. There
Okay.
is, there's some equipment there where you can you can plug in your phone, you can select the photo, what size you want, and then 10 minutes later it's printed for you. So I do that. So I physically print that, and then I and then I'm making that on a B4 size piece of paper.
Okay.
So I fold the piece of paper three times one way, three times the other
Yeah,
way. So
I
it
saw
turns
this on your
into,
Twitter. I saw this on your Twitter, and
yeah.
where you had some photos of it talking about how you make your mini books or how you make your zine.
Mm.
Hmm.
So I found that I found that system from someone, and I thought that's a really good idea. So and then it's a few folds, it's a few cuts, and then I just sort of I glue the originals that I've printed off of the story and glue it all up, and then I have a master copy, and then I sort of I cut it and fold it and get it all ready, and then I printed it at the moment at the local 7-Eleven.
Okay. Cool. So, I mean, um, is it a very time-consuming process to put them together?
Um, yeah, it is, but I don't really notice it. I think it's one of those things when you really enjoy it's
Yeah.
like it probably takes me like 5 minutes to cut. Like once one is printed, to cut and fold it takes about 5 minutes, and putting it together is probably a couple like maybe a half an hour job or something, but it's not really that long a process. I spend maybe a week on the story, 4 or 5 days on the story.
Okay.
So that's the main, that's of course the nuts and bolts for my zine.
Hmm.
Um, I want the story to be as best as possible, and I'll work on it for maybe 4 days by myself, and then I'll send it off, or maybe 5 days, and then send it to someone. And go, okay, what do you think? And where could I go with this, or what should I do with it?
Okay, cool.
Um,
Hmm. So I'm wondering where do you distribute it in Tokyo, or how can people get their hands on it?
well, I'm looking at a few at some of my options for zine shops. There's a few zine shops actually here in Tokyo, and the more I'm talking about it and talking to people about it, the more I'm discovering. Um, there's also a few online distribution shops based here and, of course, overseas, which I'm looking into. But at the moment, it's basically out of my little office out the back of my out the back of my house, put in envelopes, sent in the post.
Cool. No, I was just like wondering, are there any like cool cafes that you like or coffee shops that you're a frequent patron of where people can go and get them, that kind of thing?
Well, not as of yet. Actually, my local coffee shop used to have a little table with some flyers and things, and then the moment I made the first copy of the zine, I went there and it was gone. The table was gone. So
Oh no. Okay.
uh, I am looking around, but I did drop a few off at I did actually leave some at a place called a place in Shibuya, a little cafe in Shibuya. I left a couple of copies there, and I hope to make that a regular thing, or as often as I can get there, drop off a few more. But
Cool.
um, but as soon as I do get a permanent place, it will be on my Twitter, and people will be finding out about it.
Yeah, yeah, cool, cool. So, I mean, I'm curious as far as like the expat writing community in Tokyo. Like I've had on I've had on my podcast a few writers in the past. You know, Bai McNeil's been on a few times, and I know
Hmm.
he's done readings in Tokyo, and he's gone to different like writers workshops in different parts of the country and this and that. Sadly, we've missed each other a few times, and I was in Kobe, but I'm curious. What is the kind of expat writing scene like in Tokyo? Is it easy if you're a writer? You're someone who's moving to Tokyo, or you've moved to Tokyo and you're interested in writing, to get out there and meet some other kind of like-minded writers or creative types?
Um, yeah, I think it is. I think there are a few events going on, a few monthly events, a couple of writing meetups and things like that. There's also, depending on what type of writing you do, like if you are more focused on blogs or you're more focused on, short stories or novels and things like that. There are a few things like that. There's an art book fair, coming up next month, October,
Okay.
and also Japan Writers Conference is coming up on the 8th of October. So there are a couple. So that's a bigger event, whereas the art book fair is quite large, but it's of course I think it's aimed at a different sort of community.
Hmm.
Um, but like I would say through social media, like that's the way I've found a lot of people here in Tokyo. Before coming to Tokyo, I wasn't really on like Twitter, for example.
Yeah.
I was on the other ones, but I found I don't know if it's maybe expats or if it's the big city, but Twitter is quite a great place here in Tokyo to find people,
I think it's like that
and
everywhere.
find like-minded. Yeah, I guess it is. I like I said, I didn't use it before Tokyo, so it's I can't really I can't really talk about those other places. But so how is it? How have you? How's it work for you?
Well, I mean, Twitter. I mean, people often ask me. They're like, "How do you find these people?" I mean, I was having this conversation just today,
Mm-hmm.
with some different coworkers, because I have two Twitter accounts. I've got one that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a newish one that's just kind of a professional working one, where it's basically just about teaching and education.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have my main account, my at JlandKev account, which is all about all things Japanese, Japan, but it's also about like tech stuff, science stuff, just stuff that interests me.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's how I found pretty much almost every guest I've ever had on the podcast. I found them through Twitter.
Yeah.
There's a lot of me searching for
Yeah.
hashtags, searching through people, just stumbling across people, and like just spending a lot of time kind of interacting with people. And then I find people who I think are interesting, and then I approach them and I say, "Do you want to come on my podcast?" And if
Yeah.
they don't know what it is, then I kind of like fill them in on more of what it is. And a lot of people who've been on my podcast didn't even know what a podcast was.
Wow.
So I'd have to say it's kind of like a radio show, but it's like an on-demand thing,
Mhm.
and but yeah. So I mean, I think it's an absolutely invaluable tool for what I do here, because
Yeah.
I get to meet so many people through it. So I guess that's kind of the, how shall I say, the unglamorous part of podcasting, the kind of producer work of hunting
Mm.
of hunting down people, kind of trying to find people that would be on the show, that could be on the show, that could be interesting, and then approaching them and seeing if they would be. And I of course sometimes have people who, with open arms come running at me saying, "Yes, I want to be on your show." I've had people who are just like,
Yeah.
I'm too nervous, I'm too shy." I've had people who are just kind of flat out rude. Like,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And that there's a surprising one. In the past, I've had some people who, and again, it surprised me because the Just Japan podcast now has quite a large audience, and I've
Mm-hmm.
had people who are writers who are trying to, they've just written a book and they're trying to sell a book, and I say, "Do you want to come on my podcast and talk about it?" And there's literally thousands of listeners who are interested in Japan stuff, and I've had people
Mm.
say like, "No, I'm too busy." I'm like, "Okay,
Wow.
all right, well, there you go.
Wow.
That's not how you should promote yourself." If
Yeah.
yeah,
No. No.
no, but
Not at all.
I mean, at the end of the day, and I've had people who are, who I think are kind of out of my league, who've approached me and said, "Hey, I would like to be on your
Mm-hmm.
podcast," and I've kind of went,
That's
"Wow,
fantastic.
that's neat."
Yeah.
Twitter has been a pretty valuable tool for me in doing this, and I think, you know, like you mentioned, it's a great way to get out there and well, to get out there without leaving your phone, but to meet people and network.
Yeah, it has been. It has definitely been for me. And it sounds like it has been for you, and I'm sure for a lot of people. And it's easier to find like-minded people, no matter what your hobby, interest, or might be. Which which has helped me immensely. I've actually, through Twitter, I've some of my closest friends here in Tokyo to date. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot. There's a lot that I like because I'm quite social, so I meet up with a lot of people as often as I can.
Okay.
And they are all pretty much all through Twitter. We'll meet for coffee during the week. In different areas of Tokyo. We'll sometimes we'll go to events. Like for a little while, I was doing some live storytelling and things like that. So we'd go to some speaking events and stuff, live storytelling events, and I heard about all of that through Twitter.
So there you go, folks. There's a piece of advice we're both going to give to you. Get on Twitter if you don't. It does have a purpose. I mean, if you use it for a special way or a certain way, I mean, Twitter can be a way of just wasting your time. Or, a lot of people are like, I don't know what to do with Twitter, so I never got on it. Okay, I understand that. But if you do have a goal, if you're wanting to meet a community of people, I guarantee that if you're in a big urban area, there's going to be a community out there somewhere, and they're going to be on Twitter.
Yeah.
So you just got to search around for it, and you can meet those people.
Yeah, and also it's been, going back to the zine, it's been great for that. It's helped like let people aware of what I'm doing and what the zine is, and also like you said, you saw some of the photos of what I've been doing with the zine, with the folded sheets and all that sort of stuff. So it gives people a bit of an idea to follow the art at the same time and see the process and sort of. So then when it's ready and when it's due, then they're sort of like, well, okay, I want to have a look. I followed it all along. Now I want to read the story. So it's I've used it for that, and also I use it like for social reasons a lot. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I like using Twitter just to follow the news and follow stupid stuff as well. Okay, so I'm curious, what other kind of writing have you been doing recently? I think you mentioned to me you've been doing a little bit of stuff for Metropolis magazine.
Yeah, so I've been doing like a close to once a month an article for Metropolis. I'm working on an interview for them actually at the moment that I did with a local here, and also I've done a few sort of restaurant and sort of cafe reviews. I've only really recently started with them.
Okay.
But it's been going good, and I'm stepping up every time, so it's nice. And also I do a few pieces for some websites. One is based on aimed at tourists for here in Japan.
Nice.
Talking about food, travel, things like that. And also my own sort of blogs, writing about my coffee and things like that, and different cafes.
Nice.
So yeah, I try and do as much as I can. I try and keep myself busy, and and that's hence sort of some of the reason I started the blog, to just give myself a new little. Oh, sorry, the blog, the zine.
Yeah.
To give myself something new and something to aim for, and
Cool.
yeah.
Cool. Well, so I'm curious. I don't want to keep you much later. It's getting late into the evening for you, sir. If people want to find you on social media, how can they do it? And if they want to get a copy of your zine or find out more about your zine, how can they do that?
Okay, the best way, like we just said 5 minutes ago, on Twitter. So I'm at Atkinson Craig, ATKINSONCRAIG, and I'm on that pretty much flat out. I help run a few other accounts on Twitter, so I'm on it a lot. So I really I don't miss much. If you do say hi or something like that, and
Cool.
also. I'm on Instagram. Photos and things like that. But that's Twitter the best. And then just send me a message. Tell me you're interested, and then and then we'll go from there.
Cool. Nice. And of course, everybody listening, the links that have been mentioned or Craig's Twitter account will be linked in the show notes at justjapanstuff.com. So if you go to justjapanstuff.com for the show notes for episode 167, the links will be there. Craig, thank you for taking the time to stop by the Just Japan podcast tonight.
Thank you, Kevin.
Really appreciate it.
Much.
Well, that was a great discussion about being creative in Japan, about writing, creating zines. And I want to thank Craig Atkinson for taking the time to come on the Just Japan podcast. Of course, you can find him on Twitter at AtkinsonCraig. Links are in the show notes at justjapanstuff.com under episode number 167. Thank you so much, Craig, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the fact that all of you awesome guys out there who are listening are enjoying what I'm doing here. I'm trying to put together a weekly podcast, where you can learn more about Japan. You can find out about the possibilities here in Japan, the possibilities of that Japan. I keep saying here, I'm not in Japan anymore. Not at the moment, anyway. Give me a couple of months. I'll be there in January. So in this podcast, I talk about all the possibilities to the different things that you can do here, maybe you can't do here, but other people are doing. A lot of ideas, a lot of interesting things. And there we go, you can hear the background noises, the street sounds of Beijing, China behind me. Again, it was really great that Craig could take the time to join us on the podcast. So one thing I didn't mention earlier on, of course, if you ever have any questions about Japan, working in Japan, teaching in Japan, life, travel, raising a family in Japan, you can always email me at justjapanpodcast@gmail.com anytime. Or contact me on Twitter or Instagram at jlandkev, same as my Twitter. I'm all over the place, as I always mention. So there are always ways to reach out to me. So that was a lot of fun. And we're going to have a lot of fun next week as well, of course, with the podcast. And remember, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud. We're all over the place. All the links, everything I talk about tonight, are in the show notes at justjapanstuff.com under episode 167. All right, folks. Well, that does it for another episode of the Just Japan podcast from the noisy streets of Beijing, China. That's right, a podcast all about Japan. It's coming to you from China. How weird things happen, huh? All right, guys. Well, that's it. I want to thank you for all taking the time to listen to the podcast, to download the podcast, and I want to thank you guys for helping grow this podcast. Now, how can you grow the podcast? You can do that very easily by sharing it on your social media. When links come out on Twitter, please retweet them or share them on your Twitter, on your Instagram, on your Facebook. When I post something about the podcast on Facebook, share it. That's how we're going to help the Just Japan podcast grow and get bigger and better and stronger. That's right. We're back into it, folks. The summer was an off time. I was moving from one country to another. And, well, we're back. And we're already doing some really cool planning, by the way, with my family about all the different awesome things we're going to do in Japan this winter vacation when we hang out in Kobe and Osaka. I can't wait. So many cool things. And there may be a second Just Japan podcast meetup this December in Kobe, Japan. That's right, guys. Did it last year, and it looks like I'll be there again this year. So why not do it again? If you guys are interested in a second annual Just Japan podcast meetup in Kobe, Japan, please let me know. Let me know. We'll get the ball rolling on that one. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. You guys are awesome. You're the reason why I do this, why I make this podcast. Wherever you are in the world, hope you're happy. Hope you're healthy. I'll be talking to you real soon.
Bye.